Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Today's episode of Success Insight is another addition to our Outdoor Adventure series, and it's a pleasure to introduce you to Peter Zelinka. In 2016, Peter quit his full-time IT job to pursue photography. Now, Peter is an avid hiker and backpacker. He has described himself as a nomadic nature photographer, and today he is very well known as a gifted astrophotographer. And really the main reason why I really am excited to have Peter on today's podcast. So without further ado, Peter, welcome to the Success Insight podcast, Outdoor Adventure Series.
Thanks, Howard.
Now, Peter, I have to say, when I was reading in your past, a former full-time IT professional, and I describe myself as a recovering IT business consultant. So I totally appreciate that. And I'm wondering, before we kind of get into your current work doing astrophotography and all that entails, I wonder if you could share a little more detail about your background and how you decided to make that jump from having a full-time IT career into really pursuing what you call your true gift.
Well, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have seen that movie Office Space, where it's a story about a guy just going through a really horrible job and eventually losing it. That actually very closely mirrored my own scenario. I had gone to college for IT. I figured, I'm fairly decent with computers. I can make a job out of it. And then once I started working full time, I was getting more and more into photography. And that was definitely a big clash, because when you're stuck in a windowless gray server room for 9 hours a day, it really takes away from your excitement and ability to enjoy photography in some aspects anyway. As I continued to do photography when I was off of work, it just became more and more of a passion. And eventually I got to the point where I said, I cannot take this job anymore. And I put in my 2 weeks and packed up my car. And then I spent about 4 months just driving all across the Western US and taking photos.
That's very, very interesting. And I'm a little bit envious. I stuck it out in the world of business consulting, IT consulting. I grew up in this age where you just don't quit a job. And so many of us are like that. And we continue down this dead-end path, for some for the rest of their lives, but others that change kind of hit you broadside. For me, I was eventually laid off. And that's how I decided to get into coaching and leadership development. I totally appreciate, and I think you are certainly a role model for folks that, you just say enough is enough. I want to pursue what I'm passionate about, what I'm gifted at, and you went for it. Now, you had been a hiker, a backpacker growing up in the Midwest, or did that come also after you quit?
I was into hiking from when I was a kid. I would go out to we just had a vacant lot right by my house, and I go to the vacant lot and make trails and things like that. And as I got more and more into hiking, I got my driver's license, which was great. I could finally go on hikes whenever I wanted to. And then I did some backpacking trips in college. So that really, I think, kicked off the whole photography thing, because I'm out in these amazing places and all I had was a little point and shoot. And I still got some cool photos, but nothing like what you can do when you really have the right setup.
Now, when you set out in your overland adventure, just kind of camping out and heading west, did you have an idea of where you were going to go? Or did you basically said, well, that looks like a nice place, let me go there? How did you kind of plan out this adventure?
To be honest, I think it was just that I would see photos and then I would say, I want to go there one day. And I'd mark it on my map. And then eventually I had enough points pinned on the map and I could almost see a route. It would be, I'd get to, let's say, the Rocky Mountains. I'd spend a couple of days there. If I got tired of it, I'd say, all right, let's go down to the Great Sand Dunes next. Spend a few nights there until I got the shots I wanted, move on to Durango. And I just kept making my way west until I got to the Pacific Ocean, really.
That's fantastic. Where in the Western states are you right now?
Yeah. So last year, right before everything kind of went to hell, I moved out to Kanab, Utah. And I knew this was a great spot for astrophotography, which is mainly what I'm doing now, because we have really dark skies, hardly any light pollution, tons of wide, flat, open surfaces to shoot. And that turned out to be a pretty good choice.
I have to share with you is I grew up in the Midwest, in the Detroit suburbs. And then eventually I found myself for I would say, half my life in Chicago. And I'd always been fascinated with the stars. I mean, I could see the Big Dipper. I could see, and I've always known Orion's belt. We used to have a planetarium in our high school in Oak Park, Michigan. I was always fascinated by the stars, by the Milky Way, but I never really saw them, except for perhaps once. I was way up on Lake Superior on Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. And I loved the stars. And I've always had this fantasy of wanting to sleep out underneath the stars. And then last year, talking about the strange year we had with COVID, is I moved from Chicago to Las Vegas. And one of the first things I did was go out to the Mojave National Preserve, which is another very well-known dark sky area. I know there's a setting people talk about and how dark the landscape is. Perhaps you can share a little bit about that. But just being able to see all these stars was just totally amazing. And what did it feel like for you when you got out to Utah and like all these stars? How did this desire to pursue the astrophotography, how did that come about?
Well, I'd seen the stars fairly well on some of my backpacking trips and a few road trips out west when I was younger. It never really was that amazing, though, for whatever reason. It wasn't until my first road trip in 2016, after I quit my job, I was out in the middle of the Great Sand Dunes camping at night. There's a way you can get a permit and spend the night out there. And when I woke up at 1 a.m, I got out of the tent, put on my glasses, and I could just see the Milky Way. It just looked massive overhead. And it was so clear that night. I'd never seen anything like it before. And it almost, to me, it looked like this alien structure floating in the sky. It was just so detailed. And I think that was really the trigger right there. And I spent all night just running around the sand dunes, taking photos. And then for the rest of the trip, it was, if I had a nice clear night somewhere, I'd try and see the Milky Way again. And that just kept getting more and more involved. And now I'm doing deep space work where I'm photographing distant nebula and galaxies and all this crazy stuff.
Okay. Now, when you started to focus on the dark sky work, the Milky Way, and some of the near nebulous galaxies, how did you begin to do your research to decide, what do I need? What equipment do I have to have? Everything from the camera, the lenses, the tripods, and all the other ancillary equipment. What did you start off with?
I mean, I started off when I was getting into this with just a Nikon DSLR and a wide-angle lens. And based on a little bit of research I had done, I figured that would be a good combo. And it worked fairly well. As I got more into it, though, I did a little bit more research. Because back in the day, there was just a handful of articles online, a few YouTube videos here and there. That was really the bulk of the information. It really, in the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, the astrophotography scene has really exploded and become a lot more accessible, to the point where if you already have, let's say, a DSLR and a camera lens, or that's a wide angle or more telephoto, you can even just use that to get some really breathtaking photos. The one thing that's helped me out a lot, though, is what's called a star tracker. It sounds more complicated than it really is, but it's a little device you put your camera on, and it's going to move it with the speed of the stars very slowly. And the end result is that you can now capture deep space images or just much higher quality Milky Way photos with your current camera lens. And that was really the game changer for me.
And I definitely want to touch on these star trackers. And, for our listeners, when I moved out here to Las Vegas and I started to do my research, Peter and his YouTube channel was one of my go-tos for researching how do I get out there and take pictures. Because the very first time, you'll love this, Peter, the very first time I went out, I failed miserably. The moon is one of my little nemesis. I was out at Lake Mead the other day taking a picture of the moon, and it's like, someday I'm going to get the moon just right. But the research of taking these pictures and then the trackers. Now, I know there's this 500 rule, which says if you have a wide enough angle lens and there's a certain, I guess, shutter speed of which you can still take a picture of the Milky Way without the blurring of the stars. What is that rule?
Yeah, that's one of the foundations that a lot of people refer to. It's not the best, but the formula is you take 500 divided by the focal length of your lens. And whatever number you get, that's your maximum shutter speed without star trails. Really, though, if you want to get sharper stars, I usually recommend taking the number 200 or 300. So you take, let's say, 200 divided by 14 millimeters, that gives you something like 15 seconds. And then, okay, I can shoot about 15 seconds before I really start to notice trailing in my photos.
And if you're an amateur, perhaps like me, and you're just getting started and you want to get out to some of the dark sky sites, whether it's up in Utah where you're at, down in Nevada, the Mojave National Preserve where I'm at, what is your recommendation for the novice to get started in this profession or in this passion? Let's call it a passion, so that they can not only experience the stars, but also enjoy the end product, which is being able to share a picture here or there of the Milky Way or some other distant galaxy. What's your recommendation?
Well, I've got a couple. I think the first thing really is to just find a dark sky. And I know for a lot of people, that's going to be difficult. But for example, when I was living in Ohio, I was in what you would consider a red or an orange zone on a light pollution map. And there's this website called lightpollutionmap.info, if I remember correctly. That has a really good overlay. But my point here is that even if you're in a light polluted area, like I was in Ohio, I could drive 20 or 30 minutes and get to a noticeably darker sky where I could actually see the Milky Way. It wouldn't look like you'd see out in the middle of nowhere, but it still looked pretty cool. And even just driving 20 or 30 minutes can be the difference from a not so good photo to a pretty cool photo. So that'd really be the first thing I would say is, again, at least drive 20, 30 minutes to a darker sky. And then from there, it's really just down to trying to make sure you don't run into too many problems, because a lot of people, myself included, they get out there, they're trying to work in the dark, they're getting overwhelmed, they get frustrated. So just take it slow. Just understand that your first couple of nights probably aren't going to go very well. If you even get a focused image, that's a good start. And as you get more into it, it's really going to open up a lot of opportunities. And there's so many good resources online nowadays that'll walk you through those beginning steps. And then once you feel more comfortable, that's when you can really take it to another level with maybe an upgraded camera or that star tracker or anything else.
When I moved out here to Las Vegas, I found a local meetup group. Are you familiar with Meetup?
To be honest, no, I'm more of an introvert, so I don't get out to too many meetups. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of good astronomy clubs and astrophotography clubs all over the country. And if you even just search your general area, let's say, Southern Utah Astronomy Club or something, you should be able to find a couple of different groups. And that is one thing that a lot of people have said to me, is that they're afraid to go out by themselves for a lot of different reasons. Me personally, I don't mind it. But if you are a little bit nervous, then you might want to go to one of these meetups, meet some like-minded people, go out to a nearby dark sky site and shoot with them. And that would be a good way to get started.
When I got here, so when I joined this dark sky, it's actually a Milky Way meetup. And I felt, even with the quarantining and social distancing, it was a nice way to be around other people. And it's been fun. I'm making friends, coming out here. I didn't really know anybody, so it was nice to be able to take advantage of that. But I have gone out, for example, to Mojave, and I keep mentioning Mojave because it's so close and I love it out there. But that's where I actually took, not just the Milky Way, because it's been off season during the winter, but the Orion's Belt and then the Orion Nebula. And in fact, I went out 2 days in a row because it was just such I knew the weather was going to be great. But I like the idea of being out and about. I mean, you again have that background as a hiker and a camper, backpacker. And so that comfort of being by yourself and taking care of yourself. But, that's definitely an option for people out here. But also, as you kind of concur, is that finding a good meetup group or a photography or an astronomy club is definitely an advantage to really kind of getting into this hobby. I'm curious, as you have been exploring the world of astrophotography, are you finding yourself, or maybe you already had been comfortable with finding the objects out in the dark sky, or is that something that gift come along with your development as an astrophotographer, just getting familiar with the night sky?
Yeah, I think that's something that hopefully everybody gets better with as they get better at astrophotography, because, when you start off, you don't even hardly know where the North Star is. I mean, generally where it's at. So to know where a faint little nebula is at in one little portion of the sky at a certain time of the year, that just comes with practice and spending a lot of time. For example, there's an app called Stellarium, and you can download this for free on your computer. And it's a full planetarium style software. So you can go to any time, any day, whenever you want, and you can see what the night sky is going to be. You can even type in, let's say, the Andromeda Galaxy, and it'll show you where it's at in the night sky. And that's really what allowed me to learn where all these different objects are, is, again, an app like Stellarium. And now that I get out there on location at night, I almost have this mental planetary software in my head now. And I say, okay, there's, let's say, the North Star. And then I go over to the right, there's Andromeda this time of year. In the same way that I'm really good with directions during the day, I'm pretty good at identifying wherever I'm at night, just based on the stars.
As you began to really go head first, or you jump right into the cold stream with astrophotography, how did you begin to put some distance between your earlier career as an IT professional and this new career? What was it like starting up the business and really deciding this is what I want to pursue? What was that like?
It wasn't easy, I can tell you that, because I had never taken a business class in college. I didn't know much about business at all. Never took a teaching class or a photography class. So this was all really new to me. My thought process was, at the time, if you want to be a professional photographer, you have to sell prints. And that's kind of what I started trying to do. But in that first year when I quit my job, I only made $1,000 from prints. In 2017, I only made $2,000 from prints. And by that point, I realized this is not the way that's going to work out for me. And it kind of just naturally progressed into astrophotography. I think I made like a YouTube video on some basic processing, and that went on to be really popular. And then I did a webinar for this group called North American Nature Photography Association. They're like a nationwide photography group. They really liked the webinar that I did for astrophotography. And they ultimately wanted me to teach an astrophotography workshop. And all this just started to come together more and more. And I started a YouTube channel, started doing more and more videos, started doing these workshops. And it all just kind of eventually came together. And it kind of ties into what what you mentioned earlier about following your gift. If you just keep pursuing it, you'll find different avenues that aren't working. You just ignore those and move on to the ones that are. And eventually, as long as you just keep pursuing it as much as you can, things will start to work out, but it might not be the easiest journey.
I have to share with you is as I went into coaching, and when I coach a lot of clients who are going down a path of career development. This is what I do today. I want to do something different tomorrow and the 10 years from now, whatever that might be. Or perhaps it's career transition. They've lost their job. So, you voluntarily left yours. I got laid off. And I always have used the term passion. What are you passionate about? But I love that distinction that you've made. We can be passionate. I think you wrote, you can be passionate about, it was on your website. Help me out here, Peter.
I think, one thing I've said that I found true is I used to be passionate about music, and I worked so hard to become a good musician. And then you could get some guy who's just naturally talented at it, and he could play this amazing music I couldn't even hold a candle to because he was naturally gifted at it and I wasn't. And, I could do that for fun in my spare time, but to pursue that with everything, it would have ultimately just been not the best idea.
And I love that because now, it's quite obvious your gift is photography. It's astrophotography. And also your gift is teaching others how to take pictures, how to select and set up the equipment. And by the way, folks, Peter's YouTube channel, he has over 41,000 plus followers. His Instagram has over 5,300 plus followers. So there's, if you're interested in astrophotography, you cannot go wrong by, checking out the YouTube. You can join his YouTube channel on his website, all of the tutorials, astrophotography tutorials that are available via his website. So it seems to me, Peter, that's your gift, is not only just the photography, but the ability to take what can be, I think, is a very complex technology, a complex ideas about stars, alignment, tracking, and then you also have all the post-processing work that goes along with it. So that's quite a variety of gifts that you've assembled together into what is now a business for you.
Yeah. And like I said, I never planned on any of this. If you would have told me 6 years ago that I would make my income from making videos, I'd say you're crazy. And I never want to do that because, to be honest, I never wanted to make videos. I thought it was just a huge time sink. But now that I'm doing it, and I'm getting a little bit better at it. It's just great, especially, I get emails every day from people that take the courses or just watch the YouTube videos, and they show me their progress, or they just say how helpful it's been. And that's always a good indicator that you're on the right track.
I love that, because you were definitely an inspiration for me as I was kind of exploring, how do I do this? Which then now leads to another discussion, is the equipment. I mean, when we're first starting out, we're getting hopefully a decent, could be a stock DSLR, a stock camera, but then let's say we start to invest in better equipment. This idea of start tracking and then the post-processing work, can you share with our listeners a little bit about what that is, a little more detail?
Basically, again, the star tracker is no bigger than, let's say, my fist, right? They have star trackers you can fit in your pocket. And the big thing about the star tracker is you do what's called a polar alignment. In other words, if you were to do a star trails photo, I know some of you listening have probably done a star trails photo before, but that tends to show the rotation of technically the Earth. I don't want to get off on a long tangent here, but the point being,
okay.
When you aim up the star tracker to the celestial pole, the spot in the sky where all the stars rotate around, then you attach the camera to the star tracker, turn it on, and rather than having to do that 500 rule that we mentioned earlier, let's say you can only shoot 20 seconds. Now you could shoot 4 or 5 minutes and still have sharp stars. So it's a massive increase in quality. And I think the number one thing I would say, if you want to take better astrophotography images, you need to capture more light. It sounds simple, and I knew it, but I didn't really comprehend it until I got a star tracker. Because if you're taking 20 seconds of light, I mean, let's think about this. The stars are not very bright. And even if you have a nice camera, 20 seconds isn't that long. If you compare a 20-second long photo versus a 4-minute long photo, it's night and day. And I do have some videos on YouTube that go into that comparison where you can really see how much more detail and quality you can pull out just by shooting longer exposures. So after you have that data, then the trick becomes, how do you pull it out in post-processing? Because a modern camera can capture so much detail, but sometimes maybe you just didn't use their correct camera settings and it's hidden away. And in some of my YouTube videos and on my courses, I go into how to really make the best of that data you captured and create a really stunning photo. And if you are a photographer, you're probably familiar with Lightroom and Camera Raw and Photoshop, and you can use all those same applications for astrophotography. It's pretty easy to transition, and you don't have to learn too much the high-end software.
Now, one thing that I learned as I was going out and beginning to do the research is there's this idea of stacking, because you have what I love about the Milky Way is it's there. It's up in the sky. You just point your camera to it and you're going to get a beautiful shot, hopefully. What I find really exciting about the Milky Way is, depending on the location, the dark sky, is the foreground is almost as important as the Milky Way itself, because that's what's giving it the flavor, the impression, its own little uniqueness. And those images are not just one image of the foreground and the Milky Way, but oftentimes there's the merging of 2 or more images, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, if you're just starting off in astrophotography, the easiest way to do things is, again, let's say take just a single 15 or 20 second long photo. That way you have a sharp foreground and a sharp sky. The problem with that, as we discussed, is that you're going to have a lot of problems in the image because you didn't capture enough light. And if you're using that star tracker or you're doing photo stacking, then one thing I like to do is just aim the camera up a little bit higher, capture 90% sky with the star tracker. Then I can aim the camera down a little bit, capture my foreground. And then when I get to the computer, I can just blend them together very seamlessly. And that gives you the best of both worlds. Because if you think about it, if you are using a star tracker and you're tracking the motion of the stars, now your foreground is going to blur out. So there's always a trade-off. And this is something I go into in a lot of detail on the YouTube channel. But at the end of the day, if you can capture a really high quality sky or a real high quality foreground, you can blend the two together. And sometimes as little as a few seconds in Photoshop if you know what you're doing. And I know some people say you're faking it or this and that. But as far as I'm concerned, if you're taking both photos at the exact same spot, just aiming up and down a little bit, it's the same scene you get, just a lot higher quality.
Yeah, I have to say, like this year, this coming summer, my goal is to begin to take longer exposures with my tracker. And the one I use, and I know you have a video and a course on it, is the Move, Shoot, Move. And we'll be nice to the guys and put a backlink to their site on this podcast. But that was a nifty little device to be able to do my tracking, get some nice images, but now also to take those images, stack them together, and then to also merge those with a nice foreground image. One more technical question I'm curious about for our listeners. When you're this idea of stacking, can you speak a little bit to what that is, for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, stacking is mainly, you could do it for both wide angle and telephoto work. I normally just use it if I'm photographing a nebula or galaxy. And the thought process is, let's say I take a single 4-minute photo of the Andromeda galaxy, which is something like 2 million light years away, roughly. If I take one photo, there's still going to be a lot of grain because I haven't captured that much light. But if I take, let's say, 100 4-minute long photos, and then I stack them all together, that's going to average out all the junk generated by your sensor, and it's going to bring out the detail from the actual object. So in other words, rather than taking a single exposure, you go out and you take a bunch of photos one after the other for anywhere from 1 hour to multiple nights in a row in some scenarios. And ultimately, the more data you're able to capture, the better the final image will turn out. And there's some really nice software out there for free on both Mac and Windows. And the process of stacking is usually very simple. You just load in all the photos you took, hit a few buttons, and it does all the work for you. So it's a pretty easy process.
I love that. And for our listeners, again, you visit Peter's website, peterzelinka.com, and he has a library of tutorials that you can sign up for to get this type of instruction. So really, it's fantastic. Peter, in the work that you're doing now, what are you going? Do you see yourself continuing to create tutorials? I know on your website you also have some personal online classes. Where do you kind of see yourself taking this career of yours?
Well, for a while, to be honest, I felt like I reached a plateau with my current camera gear. And I was just doing the same thing night after night. I was starting to get old and I felt like there was room for growth. And actually, one of my students who happened to have just moved to Kanab, he was very generous, him and his wife. They actually donated a much better, what we call a go-to mount, and almost all of his gear. He unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago, and that was kind of the catalyst for all this. He was a big fan of mine. And because of this donation now, I'm able to take everything to a whole new level with a large telescope and a much more accurate mount that basically, when I say go to, I can just type in on my phone, let's say the Andromeda galaxy, and it automatically moves right up to it, centers it up, and I can start taking photos. Whereas the star trackers that I've been using and I have my courses on, those you have to find all the objects manually, but they're also a lot more portable and easier to use in some aspects. So now that I have this go-to mount and a lot of new equipment, I can hopefully start making some tutorials on that. There's already a lot of good videos, frankly, on YouTube about them. But at the same time, there's a few little areas that are missing. And I feel like I can fill in those gaps and hopefully make people's lives a lot easier if they're thinking about getting a go-to mount.
What I love about your YouTubes is, every component, whether you're talking the tripod, the little rock bag that fits in between the tripod, the intervalometer, the types of bracketing or the mounting that you put your camera on. I mean, all of your lessons talk about every one of those components, depending on what the topic of the lesson was. So this is not you're getting a piece of software and a lesson and good luck, but you're actually going into quite a lot of detail with these lessons. And talk to, if you can, a little, or share a little bit what people are saying about your tutorials and how that has changed their perception of perhaps their own gifts. What are they saying?
Well, I mean, based on the feedback I've gotten on YouTube and via email, like you said, the one thing is just that a lot of the videos that other people might make, they might cover some good concepts, but if you're just a normal person and just a beginner like I was, then they might gloss over some things that really leave you stumped. And even if they just miss one little thing, you could be left scratching your head and be stuck. And because I was in that position not too long ago, I kind of know how to say, like, look, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And from everything I've heard, that's been very helpful for a lot of people. And I'm hearing, almost every day, people who just got a tracker for the first time, or they've been doing photography for years, but are getting into the hobby. It's really helped them to speed up their own process. And as far as I can tell, make their lives a lot easier, which is good to hear, because astrophotography can be difficult, but if you can understand the concepts and just practice a couple nights a week at most, you'll be in good shape.
Excellent. Now, I'm curious too, as a photography guy, and I should say I paid my way through school as a wedding photographer, which probably is a good reason to inform people. This is why I'm still single. Too many weddings in my lifetime. It was in the days of film. Now it's in the days of digital and DSLRs, and now there are mirrorless cameras out there. What's your preference in terms of camera? And I know you're a Nikon guy. I'm a Canon guy. You and I are still having a very nice conversation. We're not arguing with each other over the internet. But where do you see yourself going as far as the photography equipment?
Well, I mean, I've been on Nikon since 2014. I still think they make good cameras. On the one hand, I want to say the camera doesn't matter. On the other hand, I've seen enough examples where the camera does matter. And therefore, I mean, the Nikon, it really depends on your individual camera. I guess that's what I would say. For example, I've seen people with Canon 5D Mark IIIs that get absolutely horrible images at night because their camera's sensor. I've also seen people with Canon 5D Mark IIIs, the exact same camera, they get amazing images. So for whatever reason, there can be a huge variance between the same exact camera model just due to who knows how many different factors. And that's why I would say, don't rush out and buy the latest camera just because somebody says it's good. You might already have an amazing camera. You just got to go out and test it. And I don't really like getting into the whole camera debate too much because, everybody likes what they like.
Sure.
But for me, the Nikon cameras, especially my new, well, not that new, the Nikon D780, it's an older, point being it's a DSLR and it does a really good job. The mirrorless cameras, they have some nice features as well for astrophotography. For example, the Canon EOS R, that's a mirrorless camera. I was teaching a lesson and my student, he turned on the live view preview on the back of the screen and we could actually see the Milky Way in real time on the live preview, which was amazing. On a DSLR, you're just never really going to see that. So the mirrorless cameras definitely have some benefits, but I'm still kind of the old school guy. I like the DSLRs for a variety of reasons.
When I first went out with the meetup group, I had had a Canon EOS 30D, and I have a really good wide angle lens. But unfortunately, my camera, the ISO only went up, which is the light sensitivity for folks, only went up to, I believe, like 800. I mean, that's how old the camera was. Whereas the newer, I ended up buying a used Sony camera, which helped me with my ISO. And I looked at it as a kind of a stopgap until I could afford a better, perhaps used digital camera like one of the mirrorless Canons. So I'm a Canon guy. What can I say? As far as your website now, you've got a lot of these tutorials. Can folks come to you for online lessons? I mean, one-on-one, is that something that's available?
Yeah, ever since they kind of started with the lockdowns and all that, and traveling became a pain, I started doing online lessons. So if you go to my website, I think it even just says at the top, online lessons. You can click on that. Basically, if you just send me an email, let me know what days and times work. We can go through, usually via Zoom, and maybe I can take a look at your setup if you're having trouble, or if you have some images you've already taken, we can go through and process them together, or even just answer any questions you might have about the general process of astrophotography.
Well, I'll tell you what, Peter, this summer, I'm going to definitely take advantage of that as I start to delve into the world of post-processing. Peter, when you're not working, or actually you're not working, you are pursuing your gifts. When you're not making videos out there shooting, what else do you enjoy doing?
Well, now that I'm out here in Kanab, I'm doing a lot of hiking, especially now that it's not 100 degrees every day. And if I'm not hiking or out exploring, I'm also working on trying to get my pilot's license. So I'm going out to St. George and flying a couple times a week. And beyond that, I'm actually kind of a lazy guy. I just sit around and play video games. So, yeah.
Okay, you're a true tech guy. You're all tech. Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating story. I mean, this having left IT and now pursuing this passion, and really, you have been again a gift to me. And I know, just your YouTube channel and Instagram followings, you're definitely a gift to a lot of other people who, this year of 2020 and COVID, I mean, getting outside and pursuing outdoor activities has been an important part of us getting through this really weird year. So, this is definitely the work you're doing and what you're giving back to all of us has been definitely very grateful for that. Peter, I know we've kind of alluded to your website, but again, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, I'd say number one, just go to YouTube and type in Peter Zelinka, because that's where you're going to get the most content, the most wide ranging as well. And then from there, if you like what you see, I've also got my website, which is just peterzelinka.com. And you can see some of the photos I've taken. I've got some blog posts which go into more detail about things like picking a star tracker or what types of filters to buy, things like that. And then if you want to see more of my gallery, I've also got the Instagram page, which again, is just Pete Zelinka. That's where you can see all the photos I've been taking over the last couple of years.
Fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here on the podcast. And I have to admit, too, I'm geeking out because you're an important part of, my moving out here to Las Vegas and taking advantage of the stars and really pursuing my love of photography. So I'm very grateful for what you have made available to people like me. So thank you so much.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Peter Zelinka. He is, an avid hiker, a backpacker, a former nomadic nature photography, but most of all, a gifted astrophotographer. And do go out and visit his YouTube channel. Just type in Peter Zelinka, do a search. Some wonderful videos, everything from start to finish, how to get into and get better at, understand the concepts, the equipment, and just kind of delve into this world of astrophotography. And he's got some wonderful images out on Instagram as well. And on his website, really quite a variety of astrophotography tutorials. Some of them are general in nature. Some of them get specific based on the equipment you have. And most of all, I mean, this is an opportunity for you to perhaps pursue a hobby or take the hobby as you have it now and take it up a notch or two. And if you're like me, you impress all your friends with all your dark sky photos and backgrounds on your Zoom pages. So just a wonderful hobby. And I'm so grateful to have gotten involved with it this past year while being out here in Las Vegas. And so hopefully my skills and expertise will improve as well, just continuing to learn more about Peter and his work and perhaps even taking advantage of some of his classwork. Folks, if you enjoyed today's podcast in our Outdoor Adventure series, do let us know. You can find this episode on successinsightpodcast.com. We're also on our Facebook and on LinkedIn Success Insight Podcast pages. This episode will be available for download on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, and we also have our Success Insight Podcast page on YouTube. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Get outside, explore the great outdoors, find some dark sky. Whether you have a camera or just want to sit out and enjoy the stars, it's out there waiting for you. Okay, we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.